Well, thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon to all of you. It's an absolute pleasure to be with you all. I'm speaking from London. I'm sorry I can't be there myself. As Pekka says, it's a very windy, wet, snowy morning in London. And I understand you've had a fantastic day of discussions today, so it's a real pleasure to be with you. I'm Nick Godfrey, I'm Senior Advisor at the Grantham Institute, and really going to follow on from what Pekka mentioned in terms of the work we've been doing with the Coalition of Finance Ministers, particularly to support them in developing a flagship guide to climate action, which I hope can be useful not only to the members of the coalition, but also non-members and those that are interested in joining. I'm going to share some slides. I'm going to talk for around 10 minutes, then I'm going to hand over to my colleague Anika Heckwolf, who's going to follow on from me. I'll just ask the Secretariat to maybe let me know if the slides are sharing effectively before I start.
Yes, we can see your slide.
That's wonderful. All right, I'm going to we're going to talk for about 20 minutes on strengthening the role of finance ministries to drive climate action. It's wonderful to see so many finance ministries in this room, and congratulations on your leadership in all sorts of ways. I'm going to say something about the guide, the purpose and the context, and then going to say something about why we feel that ministries of finance matter so much for climate action and economic transformation. Annika's then going to say something about the framework and guide for ministers and ministries that we've developed and the global call to action. And then we'll open up for any questions and comments. So just to say, the purpose of this flagship guide is to help better understand, recognise, empower, operationalise the role of finance ministries and ministers in driving climate action at scale. This guide has been developed as part of the work of Helsinki Principle 2 under the Coalition of Finance Ministers. This is about how do we build the capacity and capability of finance ministries to drive climate action at scale. This guide has been a product of a major collaborative effort of more than 30 organisations. It's benefited from input and advice from our country steering group of 15 ministries of finance who are part of the Coalition of Finance Ministers. We have an expert advisory group and a range of external contributors and reviewers that we're enormously grateful to. In December, in the sidelines of COP27 in Egypt, we launched a global consultation to gain feedback on the report, really to help build consensus about how can we think about transforming the role of finance ministries writ large globally, global north, global south, across South Asia and the East Asia region to drive climate action. The final report will be launched and presented to finance ministers at the major meeting of ministers in April in Washington.
Sorry, Nick.
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt. Can you put it on full screen? The slides are not turning. We're only looking at your first slide.
Okay.
Can you put it into a full screen mode? A slideshow mode. Go to the slideshow tab.
Yeah, I have done that actually. Sorry about that. Let me try one more time. Let me share my desktop instead, and hopefully that will be more effective. Can you just let me know if you can see this?
Yes, we see that. It's not slide. Just a second. Yes. Okay.
Can you see this slide now?
Yes, introduction slide, right?
Yes, wonderful.
Great.
So, as I mentioned, we launched a global consultation process on the on how we might think about strengthening the role of finance ministries globally. So this just gives you a sense of who's been involved. It would have been, you know, we've had a number of countries from the region that have been involved, such as Malaysia, Indonesia. We have a range of other countries that have been part of our steering group, including the US Treasury, the UK, Jamaica, European Union, range of other countries. And as I mentioned, a range of institutions have been supporting this effort globally. So why, in our view, do Ministries of Finance really matter for climate action and economic transformation? Well, I probably don't have to underscore to many of you the urgency of action. There's a very large gap that remains between national climate strategies and temperature targets and the strategies and resources to deliver them. So just to say, the IPCC have suggested that we need to see a close to 50% reduction in carbon emissions by the end of this decade to stay on track to avoid global warming of no more than 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial average. Right now, we're on trend globally to see an increase in emissions of 10% on 2010 levels by the end of this decade. So you can see a very large gap between the commitments that countries have made, the action that they're taking, and the actual delivery in terms of emission reductions. And to reach net zero emissions by mid-century, which is where we need to be, clearly we need to see no less than a fundamental reorganization of the global economy. We need to see the total decarbonization of key economic systems in energy, in buildings, in transport, in industry, and agriculture. And clearly we need to invest at scale to enhance resilience and build sustainable, resilient infrastructure to tackle the already inbuilt effects of climate, which seem to be, unfortunately, rapidly escalating. So there's a significant and urgent need to take action. To deliver on that scale of economic transformation in all of the key sectors across the world's economy, clearly we need to invest at scale. You'll see here at the moment, new analysis by the Climate Policy Initiative suggests that we're very, very far away from the scale of annual investment that is needed to drive the type of transformation we need to see. So not even close to $1 billion has been invested globally in the transition to a zero carbon, climate resilient economy. And we need that to at least quadruple and possibly higher over the coming years to stand any chance of driving the type of transformation that we need to see. And this scale of investment that we need to see, is round about 2% of global GDP that needs to be increased and sustained year on year for the next 3 decades. That's closer to 4 to 5% in emerging markets and developing countries, and potentially higher. This type of investment, in our view, should be channeled into 4 priority areas. So the first is really transforming the major emitting sectors, particularly the energy sector. Major investment in strengthening adaptive capacity and building resilience, including financing loss and damage. Clearly protecting and restoring natural capital, including sustainable agriculture, land use practices, conservation of biodiversity is important, and fostering a just transition to support those sectors and communities that are impacted. The good news, in our view, there is sufficient global capital and liquidity to close these investment gaps, particularly with support for the most indebted and vulnerable countries. So we do need to urgently act. We need to invest at scale in all of the key sectors to transform the global economy. And in our view, Ministries of Finance, your leadership matters enormously to deliver this economic transformation. You're centre of government's policy, you're centre of government bodies right at the crux of coordinating economic tax policy, mobilising investment and managing implementation. You have an overview of your country's entire economy. I know many of you play a role in shaping national visions, development plans, investment plans. Globally, Ministries of Finance oversee expenditure of all main government departments. That gives Ministries of Finance direct or indirect control over 1/3 of global GDP, worth over $30 trillion, as part of the $100 trillion global economy. And many of you are regulators or shareholders in state-owned enterprises, development banks, and provide an important role in regulating the financial sector. So the urgent need, the investment requirements, and the absolute criticality of Ministries of Finance. In our view, scaling up climate action represents an enormous opportunity for you as Ministries of Finance to reach your core objectives of macro stability, growth, and responsible management of public finances. We've shown that action by Ministries of Finance can deliver at least 4 major benefits. The first, A rapid switch to renewable energy presents an opportunity for you as countries to deliver the cheap, secure and clean energy that you need and to fight inflation, which is particularly important in the context of the current cost of living crisis. Of course, we know that renewable energy has cost parity or below in many major markets. Second, in our view, acting on climate will help you as Ministries of Finance to avoid escalating risks with macro critical consequences. So, of course, we know the economic and budgetary costs of the major escalation in natural disasters and climate risks, but we also know that failure to act on climate is starting to have a significant impact on sovereign credit ratings and the cost of capital. Third, in our view, climate action can unlock significant growth and development benefits. It really can be the growth and development story of the 21st century. It can be at the heart of driving innovation, the development of green jobs. It can clearly drive immense health benefits from reduced air pollution and indeed cost savings. And finally, clearly, we should recognize that investing in resilience is just as important as investing in mitigation. The growing incidence of climate hazards is really marked, and we believe that investing in resilience can really unlock a triple resilience dividend for the economy, society and the environment through avoided losses and increase in the economic viability of a wide range of economic activities. So the opportunity is there. And the good news is that we've seen many Ministries of Finance already stepping up. And the Philippines has done an extraordinary job at placing climate at the heart of their approach. And the Ministry of Finance, you'll probably know, chairs the Climate Change Commission that's in charge of the NDC in the Philippines. There's a whole range of other countries that are taking action. The US Treasury has recently introduced a climate literacy program for all of its staff. The Ministry of Finance in Denmark has updated its mission and vision to drive whole of economy climate action. Fiji has set up a climate change international cooperation division. Rwanda's Ministry of Finance is leading the country's NDC revision and is identifying investment needs. Uruguay, the Ministry of Finance, an extraordinary story of using major fiscal incentives to drive the transition to close to 100% renewable energy, and Jamaica investing in disaster risk financing. And however, as Pekka mentioned, despite these positive examples, much more work needs to be done to help Ministries of Finance everywhere systematically integrate climate into their core functions and capabilities. So there's much more work to be done. There remains a disconnect between the ambition of national climate strategies and the supporting resources and policies provided. Only around a quarter, of the members of the Coalition of Finance Ministers are actively involved in all stages of the NDC development and implementation process. 14 out of 35 OECD countries are practicing green budgeting. That needs to go up. Not enough Ministries of Finance have dedicated ministry-wide strategies that place climate at the heart of their core operations. And at the same time, we see the G20 continuing to subsidize fossil fuels. We don't see enough effort to expand carbon pricing and subsidy reform. And there are a whole range of other measures that need to be taken. We've put together a guide to climate action for finance ministries, which we believe is hopefully a comprehensive set of options that you can consider to strengthen your core functions and capabilities. I'm going to hand over to my colleague Anika Heckwolf, who will walk us through that.
Thank you, Nick, for the context setting, and hello from me. My name is Anika Heckwolf. I'm a policy analyst at Grantham. Can I just check that you can hear and see me all right? I will take the silence as a yes, and okay, great. Thank you so much. Yeah, I want to now dive a bit more into the meat of the guide, so to say. So Nick has, of course, just talked a lot about the need to scale up climate action. But what exactly does that mean for you, for finance ministries around the world? And we found that, well, there's some work out there starting to tackle this guide. There isn't really any guide that really comprehensively and holistically lays out what finance ministries can do to drive climate action across all these many levers they have that Nick previously pointed out. So what we are trying to do with this report is really to close this gap. And we started off by asking ourselves 3 questions. First of all, what are traditionally the responsibilities of finance ministries around the world? And secondly, what are the capabilities that they need to perform on these responsibilities? And then thirdly, how can both of these be greened? Next slide, please. What we landed on is what we call this framework for Ministry of Finance climate action, that outlines how ministries of finance can enhance their core functions and their capabilities. Or I should say their typical core functions and capabilities, because of course, no finance ministry is identical. Some have different responsibilities, but we do think that this speaks to the majority of Ministry of Finance. So what does this framework look like? We've divided it up in 3 functions and 3 capabilities. So the first function we call economic strategy and vision. So this is really about how ministries of finance can contribute to, on the one hand, ambitious national climate strategies like national development, nationally determined contributions, long-term strategies, national adaptation plans. And then in the second step, embed these at the heart of the national development plans, but also investment planning processes to really drive the transition to net zero resilient economies. So this might be an area where a Ministry of Finance is not leading the work, but where they do need to work very closely with the ministry in charge, such as the Ministry of Environment or the Ministry of Planning, because Ministries of Finance really have a key role in putting together strong, achievable strategies, and also because they are then responsible for delivering on many of these aspects in the strategies through what we call function 2 and 3. So function 2 is around policy, and this is where we really get into the heart of the Ministry of Finance work. It covers two aspects. On the tax side, it's about how ministries can use their fiscal policy levers, including carbon pricing, subsidy reform, and any kind of other environmental taxes to set fiscal incentives, but also to future-proof the tax system more generally for climate change. And then on the other hand, we have the budget side, which is really on the role of the budget and the medium-term expenditure frameworks in driving climate action, as well as things like greening public investment management and public procurement. And then the third function is about how to finance all of this. So how can ministries of finance draw on public, on private, on domestic, on international capital to finance climate action, covering really a wide range of topics, everything from working with central bank to disaster risk finance, as Nick mentioned the case study earlier. And then the second part of the framework is the 3 capabilities that finance ministries, we think finance ministries need to fulfill these 3 functions. First of all, we have what we call the leadership capability, which is really around ensuring that climate change is mainstreamed across the operations of the ministry. For instance, including possibly through an explicit mandate on climate change, through an organizational strategy that covers climate, institutional setup, such as a climate unit that can help coordinate and drive the work on climate. And then the second capability is around collaboration and coordination, both within government and beyond. So how can a Ministry of Finance be part of a whole of government approach to climate action, but also navigate the external stakeholders like business, like civil society they need to engage with for successful climate action. And then lastly, we have human and analytical capability, which is really about having in place the right expertise, the right staff and skills, but also kind of right data and economic decision-making tools to drive all these processes. Thanks. And then last but not least, we have one cross-cutting theme, which is the just transition, which we argue really needs to be mainstreamed into all policy design, not only to ensure public support, but also to make sure that policies are long-lasting and as effective as possible. And I'm sorry, Pekka, I missed your presentation earlier, but I'm sure you talked about the Helsinki principles. And just to say that what we do with this framework is to also connect and leverage the Helsinki principles and really bring them all under one roof. So unfortunately, this isn't currently displayed in this graphic, but for instance, Helsinki Principle 6 and 1 around NDCs and long-term strategies are covered by function 1. Helsinki Principle 3, for instance, around carbon pricing is of course covered in function 2, and so on and so forth. Next slide, please. So what does the guide actually look like? The main part of the guide is really a deep dive into these functions and capabilities that I've just described, which we've further broken down into different action areas, as we call them. And I'll show you an overview of those in a second. And each action area is broken into 5 sections that we hope are all quite practical. So in each, we talk about the critical role of the finance ministry. For instance, what is the role of the Ministry of Finance in the NDC process? Why should they be involved? What are the different things they can do? And secondly, what are the barriers they might face and how, or what are strategies to overcome them? What are real-world examples or case studies of successful Ministry of Finance leadership or involvement on NDCs in this case? What are key opportunities for action? And then, of course, we signpost further readings that provide a lot more detail than we could possibly cover in this guide. Next slide, please. And yeah, in the terms of the different areas or action areas we cover in this report, I just wanted to show you this overview without going really into detail at this point. But to give you an idea of what one of these areas looks like, I want to focus for a minute on function 2, which is around reforming fiscal policies in the budget process. Next slide, please. So this function is split into 5 areas, 2 around tax and incentives and 3 around the budget and PFM processes more broadly. So we talk about, for instance, carbon pricing, subsidy reform, and other fiscal measures. We talk about future-proofing public finances. And then under the budget side, we talk about, like more generally using the budget and medium-term expenditure frameworks. We talk about greening public investment management, and we talk about greening procurement. And just to give you an idea of what this looks like in detail, next slide, please. You're looking into function 2C, which is specifically focused around the budget. Next slide, please. Thank you. So we argue that Ministries of Finance central on the budget process is really potentially the most important entry point for climate action. But we do still see a need for a lot of finance ministries to step up a bit more and fully use the power of the budget to drive transformation. And in the section, we refer to a number of case studies of countries that are on the way in one way or another of greening their budgets. For instance, France has a green budget and Nepal has a climate budget. And we also suggest a number of areas for action. So how Ministries of Finance can really make sure to use the entire budget process to drive the kind of transformation we need to see to tackle climate change. Next slide, please. So this is what the framework looks like. We then finish the guide with a focus on how to actually implement this framework. And we've developed a call to action. Next slide, please. Which is basically a summary of all the recommendations we make throughout the report. And that's split into 3 areas. One is around enhancing the core capabilities of Ministry of Finance, the things I mentioned earlier, like considering a mandate, maybe setting up a strategy, enhancing skills. Then the second one is about reforming Ministry of Finance core functions. So this is where greening the budget process would fall under. And then the third area is around really how to work better with other government agencies and stakeholders for a whole of government approach. Next slide, please. And we are working with the coalition on an implementation plan for how the coalition can support the implementation of the guide, including through enhanced training and technical assistance, through potentially developing a research and knowledge network or networks, and also deepening the dialogue on implementation. Yeah, this is all from my side. We've prepared a couple of questions for you to consider, but I think we're of course also happy to just answer any questions you might have. Thank you.